The camp was called Pine Hollow, and it had been running for almost 60 years. It sat on the edge of a long, narrow lake, surrounded by dense forest that stretched for miles in every direction. Most of the cabins were clustered near the water, close to the mess hall and the fire pit, but there was one cabin set apart from the rest, at the very end of a dirt trail that wound through the trees for almost a quarter mile. It was called Cabin 9, and nobody wanted to work there. The other counselors joked about it, but there was something underneath the jokes, something tight and nervous, like they were afraid that saying the wrong thing out loud might invite whatever it was they were laughing about. I found out on my third day that Cabin 9 had a history. Back in the 60s, before the camp had proper wiring, a fire had started in that cabin in the middle of the night. 3 campers and 1 counselor died. The camp had rebuilt it, kept it in use for decades, but eventually stopped assigning campers there. Now, it was just used for storage, sleeping bags, and old canoe paddles, and boxes of moldy board games. Nobody went there after dark, nobody except me, because on my second week, the camp director asked me to grab extra tarps from Cabin 9 before a storm rolled in, and I was too new, too eager to prove myself, to say no. It was already getting dark when I started down the trail. The flashlight on my phone was weak, and the trees on either side of the path seemed to lean in closer than they had during the day, their branches knitting together overhead until the sky disappeared completely. I remember the woods being unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no wind, just my own footsteps and my own breathing, both of which sounded too loud, like the forest was holding its breath along with me. When I reached the cabin, the door was already open. I remember that clearly, because I remember thinking that was strange, since the director had told me it was always kept locked. I told myself someone had beaten me to it, another counselor sent on the same errand, and I walked inside without really thinking it through. The air inside was cold, colder than it had any right to be in August, and it smelled like smoke, faint but unmistakable, the kind of smell that clings to old wood after a fire, even decades later. I found the tarps stacked against the back wall and grabbed them, and that was when I heard it. A voice, small and young, coming from the bunks in the corner. It said, "Are you here to get us out? I want to be honest with you." I froze. I told myself it was another camper who had wandered off and was hiding in here, playing some kind of prank, and I called out, asking who was there. Nobody answered. I walked closer to the bunks, and that was when I saw the shape sitting on the bottom bed, small, hunched, facing away from me. I said hello again, and the shape turned its head, slow, too slow, the way a doll's head turns when you twist it by hand instead of watching it move on its own. Its face was wrong, not injured, not monstrous in any way I could describe with a normal word, just wrong. The proportions slightly off, the eyes slightly too far apart, the mouth slightly too wide, like something had built a child out of a memory of what a child was supposed to look like and gotten most of it right. I dropped the tarps and I ran. I did not stop running until I hit the tree line near the mess hall, and when I turned around, gasping, certain something would be behind me, there was nothing there. Just the dark trail, empty, the cabin invisible around the bend. I did not tell anyone what I saw, not that night. I told myself I had imagined it, that the stress of the new job and the isolation of the woods had gotten into my head. But 3 nights later, another counselor, a girl named Erin who worked the arts and crafts cabin, asked me if I had heard about Cabin 9. She had gone there for the same reason, tarps, supplies, some errand nobody else wanted, and she described the same thing, a small shape on the bottom bunk, a voice asking to be let out. We were not the only ones. Over the rest of that summer, I heard at least 4 other counselors describe almost the exact same experience. Always alone, always at dusk, always the same question asked in the same small voice. None of us had told each other beforehand. None of us knew the others had seen anything until we compared notes, terrified, huddled around the fire pit long after the campers were asleep. The camp director finally admitted, when we pressed her, that Cabin 9 had never really been empty. She said the camp had tried closing it permanently more than once over the decades, boarding up the windows, chaining the door, But every time, within a season or two, something would happen. A fire alarm nobody could explain. A door found open that had been locked and reinforced. Voices heard by hikers passing near the trail at night. Children's voices calling for help from a cabin that was supposed to be empty. I left Pine Hollow at the end of that summer, and I never went back, not even to visit. I still think about that trail sometimes, the way the woods went silent, the way the shape on the bunk turned its head. I think about the 4 children and 1 counselor who never made it out of that fire, and I wonder if some part of them is still waiting in that cabin at the end of the trail, still asking the same question to every stranger who walks through that door. Are you here to get us out? I never went back to find out. This story happened to me when I was 14 years old, at a camp in the mountains where my parents sent me for 3 weeks every summer because they thought it would be good for me to be outdoors, away from screens, away from the city. Most of that camp was ordinary. Bug bites, bad food, awkward friendships that formed and dissolved within days. But there was a lake at the center of that camp, and something happened in that lake that I have never been able to fully explain, no matter how many times I have gone over it in my head. The lake was called Blackwood Lake, and it had a reputation before I ever set foot near it. The older campers loved telling the younger ones about it during the first bonfire of the season, the way older kids always do, trying to scare the new arrivals into staying close to the cabins after dark. The story was always roughly the same. Decades earlier, a camper had drowned in the lake during a night swim that wasn't supposed to happen, a dare gone wrong, and his body was never recovered. Ever since then, campers said, if you stood at the edge of the water after midnight and called out a name, sometimes the lake would call it back to you, in a voice that was almost right, almost human, but not quite. I did not believe any of it. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters for what happened next. I was the kind of kid who rolled her eyes at campfire stories, who thought the whole thing was designed to make younger campers wet their sleeping bags out of fear. My skepticism is probably the only reason my bunkmate, a girl named Priya, convinced me to sneak out with her on the 9th night of camp to test the legend ourselves. We left the cabin a little after midnight, moving as quietly as we could past the counselor's bunk, out through the side door, down the gravel path toward the water. The lake was perfectly still that night, black under a sky with almost no moon, and the tree line around it seemed to swallow whatever light there was. Priya was the one who called out first. She said her own name into the dark, laughing nervously, and for a moment, nothing happened at all, just the small sound of water lapping against the dock posts. Then it answered. Her name came back across the water, in her own voice, but stretched slightly, like a recording played a fraction too slow. Priya stopped laughing immediately. I remember grabbing her arm, both of us staring out at the black surface of the lake, waiting for it to happen again, half hoping it wouldn't. I called out my own name next, mostly because I did not want to be the one who admitted I was scared. It came back to me too, my voice thrown back across the water, except this time, there was a second sound layered underneath it, faint, like something else was speaking along with the echo, a fraction of a second behind, in a language I didn't recognize and still cannot describe. We ran back to the cabin that night and did not tell anyone, but 2 nights later, Priya was gone. Not gone as in transferred to another camp or picked up early by her parents. Gone as in her bunk was empty when I woke up, her shoes still under the bed, her backpack still hanging on the hook by the door. The counselors searched the camp for hours before they called her parents, before they called the police, before divers were brought in to search the lake itself. They found nothing, no body, no signs of struggle, nothing at all, as if she had simply stopped existing somewhere between midnight and morning. I was interviewed by the police, along with every other camper in our cabin, and I did not tell them about the lake, about the voices, about the thing that had called our names back to us in the dark. I told myself it wasn't relevant, that it would sound insane, that admitting we had snuck out would only get me in trouble without helping anyone find her. But every night, for the rest of that summer, I lay awake in my bunk, listening, half convinced I would hear her voice calling my name from somewhere out near the water, asking me to come find her. The The camp closed Blackwood Lake to swimming for the rest of that season, officially citing water quality concerns, though none of us believed that for a second. I never went back to that camp again. Neither, as far as I know, did anyone else who was in our cabin that year. I have looked, over the years, for any news about Priya, any update, any explanation, and I have found nothing. She is still listed, as far as I can tell, as a missing person. I think about Blackwood Lake more than I would like to admit. I think about the way my own name came back to me that night, slightly wrong, slightly stretched, with something else speaking underneath it. And sometimes, on nights when I can't sleep, I wonder whether that thing in the water finally got the answer it was waiting for, and whether it is still out there, patient, still calling out names into the dark, waiting for someone else to answer back.